G'day guys, up next I've got Brian Keller, who is a technical evangelist at Microsoft. He talks to me all about ALM and TFS and Visual Studio, what he's happy with, what he's not happy about, and then we talk about his famous VM, the VM that has TFS all pre-configured with lots of beautiful sample data. So let's check it out. So I'd love to know a bit about yourself. How did you start? How did you kick off here at Microsoft?
Yeah, so I started at Microsoft just a little over 10 years ago. I was hired fresh out of college. I was a technical product manager, which is a fancy name for, I did marketing for Visual Studio. And I loved that. I love Visual Studio, have always loved Visual Studio since I can remember when it first came out. And marketing was great, except I was really kind of at the 30,000 foot view, operating kind of in the clouds, and I really wanted to be closer to the product development, closer to customers, closer to the technology. And so about 5 years ago, I switched from marketing over into evangelism. Well, after a brief stint on the Xbox team, I came back to Visual Studio, and I've been a Visual Studio evangelist ever since.
Okay, cool. Well, then that leads me on to ask you, what are the parts in Visual Studio 2012 that you're the happiest with?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so much good stuff in Visual Studio 2012. First of all, I mean, I think anyone who's used it just notices how much snappier it is, how much faster it is, a lot of async throughout the entire product. But I think, of course, my focus is, as you know, Team Foundation Server and team development. And it's really exciting what we're doing now, especially now with like Team Foundation Service. You get almost all of the capabilities we know and love from Team Foundation Server running up in the cloud. But really, I mean, you can get started with TFS in seconds now. I mean, I'm sure you remember the early days of TFS 2005 where it took you a whole weekend to install it. And I mean, we've come a long way. The team really invested in that experience, and I think it's really the most comprehensive, friction-free ALM solution on the market.
Yeah, I forgot about that. It was so hard to install 2005, yeah. It's so hard, and now it's so simple because, yeah, incredible. And it's so cheap.
It is. Yeah, it really is. I mean, if you're an MSDN subscriber, as most Visual Studio's users are, then you probably already own a license to not only the client access license, but to the server license as well. And of course, in the cloud, if you fall into one of those categories, you can use all that functionality for free in the cloud as well.
Right. So let's look at Visual Studio, and you can choose Visual Studio Ultimate or whatever feature you want. I want to know, which feature are you most proud of that you think has really nailed it?
Oh, you're asking me to pick my favorite children here. My favorite feature, well, I mean, there's a lot of fit and finish stuff that I really like. I'm going to give you a couple, Adam. There's a lot of really fit and finish things, especially around like local workspaces, that just remove a lot of the friction that used to exist when you tried to edit files outside of Visual Studio. In the past, you would have had to go mark those files as checked out before you can, for example, open a file in Photoshop, like a bitmap that you're going to edit. Now all of that's gone. We just compare basically what's against your local workspace against the server, and we say, hey, do you want to check in those files? That's also great when you're working on an airplane, as I know you do a lot, because you don't have to explicitly tell TFS that you're going to work offline. So that stuff is really a lot easier. And then there's also things that are completely innovative in the product, like code clone analysis. This is a technology that came over from Microsoft Research and allows you to look across your entire solution for any blocks of code that look like they're similar. The reason you might do that is you might identify refactoring opportunities. I'm sure you've been guilty, I've been guilty of this, where you copy and paste from one project to another, you change a couple things, you say, oh yeah, when I have time, I'll refactor that later into some common library, and then of course you forget about it. Pretty soon your code base is becoming increasingly more difficult to maintain, it's becoming more brittle. And so code clone analysis allows you to take a step back and say, okay, let's go find those opportunities in the code where I can maybe collapse things that are similar into blocks that I can share and have a reusable library of sorts. So those are two things at totally different ends of the spectrum that are core to Visual Studio developers that I think once you get in there, you'll find are really useful.
Okay. Can I ask you about the code review?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Are you happy with how the scenarios that it completes?
I am. Code review is one of those things that a lot of people do, and I think that what we've done in Visual Studio is we've tried to recognize that hallway conversations are great, email threads are great, but oftentimes that's not enough, especially when you need to go back and audit and say, hey, was this particular code change reviewed by a senior developer? Did he or she make any comments? Did we actually take that feedback into effect before this change got promoted up to a production branch, right? And so it makes it all in one place. I mean, that's the beauty of Team Foundation Server is that we try to give you the ability to put all of these artifacts into one place so that you can start to relate this code change with that bug fix, with that build that just went out to the customer last night. And by having code reviews, it just gives you one more artifact that allows you to then relate that back to the other artifacts throughout your project and ultimately make you more productive and increase the quality of your code.
Okay. All right. So tell me something you're not so happy about, or something you haven't nailed, or features that you really want put into the product.
Sure. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm not happy, but I would say that there's plenty of opportunity for us to continue and do more. I'll give you one example, and that is that Windows 8, of course, brings a lot of new development opportunities for folks out there, as does Windows Phone 8. Especially, we're seeing a lot of excitement this week at Build with people jumping on board with that, and it's great. We have a lot of opportunity when it comes to ALM tooling for those specific technologies. So a lot of what we built around Microsoft Test Manager, for example, and the unit testing experience and the feedback client, they don't work as cleanly with Windows Phone and with Windows Store applications as we would like them to. So I would say that works on our backlog, and those are some of the opportunities that we'll be able to deliver to you in the future. One thing that you may have noticed if you track the Visual Studio blogs closely is that you're not going to have to wait another 18 to 24 months before the next set of Visual Studio features starts to show up. In fact, we've already shipped the Community of Technology preview for Visual Studio 2012 Update 1, and this contains a lot of new functionality targeted at Kanban in TFS, for example, yes, or doing better testing of SharePoint 2010 applications. And so this is another vehicle for us to get new features out there to the community of Visual Studio users without necessarily having to wait to the next release. And so you'll see us switch into this continuous value delivery model with Visual Studio and with TFS as well.
Okay. Do you expect Visual Studio to be the tool of choice for other development, such as Office development, CRM development, Azure development?
Well, I can speak mostly to Azure, of course. I think the Azure team's done a great job of building native tooling right into Visual Studio that can help you build Azure websites and cloud services. But you don't have to use Visual Studio for that. If you're coming from maybe a PHP background or a Java background, you'll see a lot more technologies that are supported on Windows Azure than you might expect from Microsoft. And so if you go up to the Windows Azure portal, you'll see it's not just about .NET and ASP and that sort of technology, right? The CRM, I'll be honest, I've never written a line of CRM code in my life, so I can't really comment on that. When it comes to Office development, they've got this really interesting model with Napa and the ability for you to go straight to the web and start to make changes in line and process those straight to the running application. I think that's a really interesting model. Of course, that's not going to work for everybody, especially as you start needing source control and be able to track bugs and be able to have the ability to snap back to previous versions of the application. And so for them, they've got a great graduated experience of going from being in the web to being in Visual Studio if you want that full-blown experience. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Visual Studio is always the best tool, because it really depends on what your objectives are, what your development expertise is, what your goals are. And so certainly I prefer Visual Studio, but for people that don't want to use Visual Studio or are not in a position to do so, we have lots of other options available as well.
And that's the quintessential point, isn't it? That there are so many options. You get to have to choose whether you're going to use the portal for Azure, or you're going to use SQL Management Studio, or you're going to use XAML and C#, or you're going to use WinJS and HTML5.
Sure.
It's hard to know the right path you're meant to follow, isn't it?
Yes, I would agree with that. However, what we try to do is we try to meet people where they are. The most of the time, you're not just coming to a platform like Azure, having zero development expertise in your past, and so you may be coming from a Java background or a PHP background, and so we try to give you the tools that are going to be natural for you coming from those backgrounds and be able to hit the ground running, building these experiences on top of the Windows Azure platform. So if you're a SQL guy and you live and breathe in SQL Server Management Studio, and that's how you want to work with your databases and your tables and so on, then we want that to work with Azure.
Right. And on the other side of the coin, Brian, have you kind of noticed that if you give devs, like a small team of devs, Visual Studio Ultimate, they have got an incredible amount of power they can do. And if they're doing Scrum, they're meant to be in small teams. Maximum you can be is 9. So it feels like devs can do so much more, but they're smaller. Are you noticing teams are kind of moving to smaller sized teams?
I haven't personally seen that. I don't have the market data on that. I mean, what's a team really at the end of the day? I mean, a team of Visual Studio developers could be in DevDiv. You could count 1,500 to 2,000 people, or you could count an individual feature team that owns, IntelliSense as being a team. So I think it really kind of depends on how you define team. But I think that
I was more thinking the IntelliSense team.
Sure.
They're shipping their piece.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So I think in that respect, obviously there's a lot of small teams that produce some pretty amazing software, and so if you look at it from that perspective, then yes, it's possible for small teams to be really, really successful. But I would definitely not ever go so far as to say that the large team is gone or a thing of the past. I mean, look at the Curiosity rover, for example. I mean, that wasn't built by a team of 5 people. That was built by hundreds of people over the course of many years. And I think in order to realize some of those much larger dreams of software projects, you really are going to need a lot of really smart people, and you're going to need to find ways to help those people work better together. And that's what we've seen with Team Foundation Server, and that's what we've tried to deliver, is this realization that the more people you add, the more specialized roles you have on a team, the higher the chaos and the higher the communication boundaries start to become a real issue. And so anything we can do to help people use tools that they're familiar with, but still be able to hand that data off to the next person who needs the product of their work to get started on their job, we really can be successful if we can recognize those boundaries and allow each person in that value chain to kind of exchange that information in a smart and effective way.
Okay. All right. Well, and then I'll ask you a tangible question on boundaries.
Okay.
If you think about checking files into, I think you lean towards TFS, but devs can check documents into TFS, or they can check them into SharePoint.
Sure.
Which one should they check them into, and why?
Yeah, that's a common question actually, because if you're a developer, TFS is going to probably be a very natural interface for you. Developers are used to source control. We've been using it for many years. Hopefully people have been using it for a long time. If not, definitely you should be doing source control. But people that are not technical, source control can kind of be a little bit overwhelming and complex, and so a document library like SharePoint might be a little bit more approachable for them, just because it's a little bit more targeted at these information workers. And so we've always had that question, because with TFS, where do you put like a marketing requirements document or a feature spec that maybe needs to be reviewed by somebody that's outside of the team and also on the team as well? And so in the past with and actually still with TFS on premises, whenever you set up a team project, you have the option of also setting up these SharePoint libraries alongside TFS. Well, a lot of people are saying, well, with the new team web access and the fact that I can store documents in source control and those can be accessible, at least in a read-only view from the web, is that going to kind of displace the old SharePoint look-aside portal? And I think that's an interesting question, and one that we'll need to figure out moving forward. Right now, that's a read-only source control web access, but longer term, maybe we can get to the point where TFS is kind of the one solution for everything, and we make it approachable to those business analysts and stakeholders that maybe don't want to install and work with Visual Studio every day.
Right. So let's think long term, and let's think that they've done a beautiful web UI for checking files in and out of TFS.
Yep.
Plus, they've put the Office 365 integration, so it's very easy to put them in and out of that as well, and it's on the same team project. Where are you going to put your marketing, where are you going to put those documents that are around the product that you're building?
Well, if that was the case, I would just put them in source control, and really those non-technical stakeholders wouldn't need to know that they're in source control. All they know is that it's a library somewhere that they can access and they can, download.
It doesn't really matter as long as they can get them.
At that point, exactly. So we obviously have a ways to go. I mean, we're kind of projecting out in the future here, but I think there's some interesting possibilities.
Okay, so Brian, a lot of people would love to know what it's like to be inside Microsoft, how the sausage is made. Can you call out a couple of awesome days you've had at Microsoft and what happened?
Every day is an awesome day. I mean, truly, I love my job. And, like just looking at this week, for example, the beginning of the week, I was backstage working on the keynote here at Build and building up sample data so that Jason Zander could go out and make some of the announcements we had around Team Foundation Service. And so Monday was fairly quiet backstage, just coding away for 12 hours. And then Tuesday morning, I came in and I kind of forgot that the day one keynote was happening. So I have some more work to do backstage getting ready for the day two keynote, and then here comes Ballmer walking past me, and I'm kind of watching from the back screen, monitors, watching him get excited and get people excited about Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8, and it's just such an awesome feeling to see these technologies that we've been working on for a long, long time actually make their way to the public and start to have the impact on millions of people's lives. And there's not a lot of companies in the world that you can actually have that experience, and for me, being able to be a part of that is just awesome. And I'm a geek through and through, so the fact that I get to work on new technologies almost every single day is just, it's great. And being able to figure out, okay, which ones are going to be most interesting to the customers that I interact with is also great. Being able to take those out and do presentations. So I could talk forever about what I love about Microsoft, but it's really, I hope to finish my career here. It's really great.
Oh, that's really good. I was in the front row, and and
nice.
Steve Ballmer honestly looked a lot more relaxed and happier, and he's thinner too. Did you notice?
He has. He's lost some weight. Yeah, we're really proud of the guy, and it was great watching him do his own demos. It was kind of surprising. I didn't know this, but Steve B cannot touch type. He's a hunt and pecker, which is funny. But yeah, he was really natural with the Windows 8 demos, and he said, I want to do all my own demos. I don't need someone to come up and demonstrate this product. If we build it in such a way that it should be usable by anybody, even kind of the business guy who's up on stage and not known for being the demo guy. But yeah, if anyone didn't get a chance to watch it, he was likable. He was funny. He was and it shows off the products really well. Yeah.
And I'm even more excited. I know I'm always thinking the future, but I think Windows 9 or whatever it is, when they've got the whole ecosystem, more bedded down and more people in it. Like, you can see how hard it is for an Apple guy to get out of the ecosystem. Now you'll have an even better ecosystem, with the Windows platform. I've just heard so many great stories from so many random people here this week. It's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I can't say anything about future directions for Windows. That's not my area. But yeah, I think it's a great time to be a Windows user and a Microsoft developer.
Right. So Brian, I want to ask you about your VM, your famous VM. Almost everybody I know uses the VM. It's their easiest way to get into doing hands-on labs in learning the ALM story and tangibly getting a feel for it. How did that come about? Did you just build it, and have you noticed how huge it is?
Yeah, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. It's really funny. I hear from a lot of people, like you said, that are using it, and I'm glad people like it. There's still a lot more stuff that I want to do with it, and continue to invest in it for the community. And really, I can't take credit for the idea of building a virtual machine. Guys like Brian Randall were working on this before I started working on it. But one of the limitations we had with previous incarnations of the virtual machine was that it really couldn't be distributed outside of Microsoft. So I started working on figuring out the process for, okay, what do we need to do to make sure all the source code and the process we go through can actually go out to customers, go out to partners, go out beyond the firewall, so that people like you can get up and lead trainings and do demonstrations, and people that are just trying to get used to Visual Studio, TFS for the first time can go through these hands-on lab scenarios. And it's just been something that I've been working on for the last few years, because really when you first install TFS, it can be hard to understand what the value of that is until you've actually run a project or seen someone else run a project. So that's what I do with my VM, is try to put you in the middle of this fictitious Fabricam Fiber or Tailspin Toys project that has a bunch of tests and a bunch of source code and a bunch of builds and a bunch of other artifacts that you can use to see, okay, I can understand how an in-flight project might look if I was to start using TFS. And so that's really where it came about. And thanks to you and everyone else in the community that continues to send me ideas and requests for the VM. It really, people call it the Brian Keller VM, but I really don't feel like it's mine. I feel like it's everyone in the communities.
Okay, all right. Well, is there anything else on the VM, like in terms of what's in there and what to be aware of and what to beware of as well?
Yeah, I would say definitely read the documentation. That's sounds kind of blasé, but yeah, do read the documentation, because there are a couple of places in the VM where I've had to do some hacks to kind of make it a realistic looking VM when you boot it up. And the best example of that is that if I build the VM and ship it on January 1st and it looks like a project is in flight on January 1st, that's great until someone downloads the VM on March 1st and all of a sudden the project data is flatlined, the sprint's over, and you're like, I don't understand what's going on here.
And there's no real sample data anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So what I've had to do in this virtual machine is disconnect the time synchronization between the guest and the host. And understanding that means that you'll realize that when you boot it up, that it actually says something like May of 2012 when you boot it up. And that's just so that every time you go into it, it feels like it's in the middle of that particular sprint. So it's not a VM that you would necessarily want to deploy within your enterprise and run a proof of concept against. That's not what it was built for. It really was built for the demo scenario, for the hands-on lab kind of training scenario. If people want to use it for things beyond that, they're certainly welcome to, but you'll need to get in there and start to disable those date and time hacks, for example.
Right, okay. All right, now before you go, just wait there for 1 sec.
Okay.
I know you're coming to Australia,
I
but
am.
But I want you to give this and share this with the family.
I will. Thank you.
And this is to remind you to come this year, because I believe you'll be coming.
Fantastic.
And with that, thank you very much, Brian. And this is
right.
Adam Kogan signing off for SSW TV.
Thank you, Adam.